So when we pick up in chapter 45, this is a really short chapter. And this short chapter is dedicated to Baruch, Jeremiah's scribe. And I'm really glad this is in there because it's a reminder to me, we all can't be the leader, right? That's just not how things work. In any sort of army, you've got people who are of various ranks, and then other people who are of different ranks, and each one has a different task. And each one is equally important, right? This is spiritual warfare that we fight. What's the illustration that 1 Corinthians uses about Christ's body, the church? Oh wait, I just said it. Yeah. Okay, the body. He uses the human body to talk about Christ's body. Does every part perform the same? Is the church a bunch of eyes? Well, that would be a very freakish looking, scary church to have nothing but eyes peering at you. There are some parts that are very obvious and visible. There are other parts that are not, but man, you need them. I was reminded the other day when one of my kids had a splinter. And the amount of, you would think we were sawing off limbs, and just, it was bad. We were screaming bloody murder. Why? Because this tiny little thing got under the skin and hit the right nerve. Your finger has got a little thing in it, and it really bothers you, and everything's out of whack, and your whole body suffers because of that, right? So this is a reminder that people are important to God, and not only the prophets, but the people who are on the sidelines, who are going along and just trying to be supportive, and sometimes not getting the same recognition, they are not forgotten by God either. And so I don't know which one of those kind of persons you are, but we all are going to fall into one of these categories, right? We're either leading or we're supporting. Sometimes we're taking on various roles, maybe both. God hasn't forgotten that, right? So in Jeremiah chapter 45, we'll cover the whole chapter here. Whole chapter in no time. This is the message which Jeremiah the prophet spoke to Baruch, son of Neriah, when he had written down these words in a book at Jeremiah's dictation, in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, saying, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, to you, O Baruch. You say, woe is me, for the Lord has added sorrow to my pain. I am weary with my groaning, and have found no rest. Thus you are to say to him, Thus says the Lord, Behold, what I have built I am about to tear down. What I have planted, I am about to uproot. That is the whole land. But you are seeking great things for yourself. Do not seek them. For behold, I am going to bring disaster on all flesh, declares the Lord. But I will give your life to you as booty in all the places where you may go. So this is the first time we've heard from about Baruch before. We knew he was on the scene, but this is the first time we hear about the emotional state of that prophet, of that prophet's helper, of that scribe. And he's struggling. He's having a hard time, and so God takes note, and he wants to give him a message. And that's what we hear about in these first 4 verses. But when you get to the 4th verse, the way he words this, say to him, what I have built, I am about to tear down. I think God's trying to communicate something there, even if it's a little simple. What is it that God's trying to get by saying God says, what I have built, I'm about to tear down?
He's in control.
In control, yes.
He's in total control.
Sure.
He made everything.
So he's not caught off guard. He's in control. Yeah.
Gives and takes away.
Gives and takes away. Sure. If I had a painting up here, and I showed you guys a painting, I don't know, we won't say it's the Mona Lisa, but we'll just say it's a decent painting. And I said, well guys, check this out. And I lit it on fire and we burned it up. Some of you might be like, oh, that's kind of fun. Others of you might be like, well, we don't start fires in the church building, Seth. And others of you would be like, how's our insurance? Is our insurance policy good? But what if that painting was the one that you happened to paint? It was the best painting you ever made. And I found it, didn't know that, and I just lit it on fire and burned it. Would you feel a little bit different, right? Or what if it was the best painting that your kid ever made for you, and I got my hands on it and I lit it on fire? You know, it hurts a little bit more sometimes if you've got skin in the game, if you've invested yourself into a project and then that project just fails. We've been there, right? You've put yourself in that situation. I think that's what God is getting at. Like, what I have built, what I've done, all the work that I put into this, I'm having to destroy it all. In other words, Baruch, yes, you're suffering, you are having a hard time, but you need to stop and think, how do I feel about this? It's not as though you've been with these people as long as I have, and you've brought them out of slavery and grown them up and put them through all this, nurtured them all this time. No. You haven't done any of that. You're just here and you're along for the ride and you're having a hard time. I invested all this, and now I have to be the one to destroy it too. I think God's making the point. I not only know how you feel, but you need to consider, I feel it much, much worse than you do. Does that make sense? A lot of times, that's one of our problems. We don't see things from God's perspective, and we think, you know what? I'm really frustrated because things are not going the way they should go, and I hate sin in the world and how it affects me. But how does God feel about that? How frustrated do you think God is because he's been putting up with that time and time and time again, way more than you have, right? You just cannot forget his perspective. And I think he's making the point, Baruch, my suffering's greater than yours. I know how you feel. And then in verse 5, that wonderful promise. Is it so wonderful? You are seeking great things for yourself. Don't seek them. Does that sound like a good promise? Oh yeah, you want to have a great investment with a big return? Don't bother to invest. It's just that, oh yeah, you want to start a business, make a lot of money? Yeah, right. Don't waste your time. It's not a very positive note in my mind. That's a very negative thing to say, right? It is. It's a negative thing to say. Baruch, sorry, what you want is just not going to happen. Think back to Jeremiah. Has he ever been the, I don't want to say the word victim, but has he ever been on the receiving end of complaining to God, saying, God, I'm having a hard time, and then God comes back and says, hard time? Remember that?
Yes.
Oh, you're having, yeah, what about, you have a hard time running with those men? Well, what about horses when they come and you got to keep up with them? Yeah. Sometimes that is God's response. Verse 5, I think, is a powerful response of God to suffering. But it's not the one that we necessarily want to hear. It speaks to his method of dealing with suffering and burnout and other things. And I think you guys will find this true. I sure find this true. Oftentimes when God is dealing with us because we're complaining about being exhausted, about being burnt out, about having a hard time, God's answer is, you need to try a little harder. That's not the answer you wanted to hear, right? It's those people who have made the mistake of praying for patience, right? You make the mistake of praying for that, and I'll teach you some patience. You just need to. What does that word patience mean again? What is that? Long suffering. Oh, okay. You want more long suffering? I can help you with that. I'll give you something. Anyway, right? Sometimes that is God's response. Okay, you need to grow. So in order for you to grow, so that you're not being burned out now, I'll just give you a whole lot more to do so that you're really exhausted, but then you realize, man, God's helping me do this. I never thought I would have been capable of this. And then you can appreciate where you were. I liken it to those people who, have you ever had a good laugh because a teenager told you they're so busy? You ever had a good laugh about that? You've been there, right? Teenager, a young person, oh man, I'm just so busy. I don't have time to do it. You don't know what busy is. You're not married, you don't have kids, you have no idea what busy is, and you have a good laugh about that. But in their mind, they think, it doesn't get any worse than this. I've never experienced it worse than this. And you're right. You don't know what you're capable of until you've crossed into the new realms of, oh, okay. And then you find out what busy really is, right? Well, this is the same thing. Sometimes God's response is, no, you want some great reward. You want me to just let all this go and let this be easy? No, that's not going to happen. But I'll give you what you need to get through this. I'll pull you through to the other side. and you will be spared. That is what Baruch is being taught here. That is the promise that God gave to him, and that's what he gets. If you're looking for more, wait for heaven, right? Wait for heaven. This is one of those passages that if you're trying to connect God's word with the health and wealth stuff that's being taught today, with the idea that God wants you to be wealthy and prosperous and to live this wonderful life here on earth, you're just going to find it's not compatible. At least in the case of God's prophets and the people who are helping them. The people who are on God's side historically have not had that here on earth. But that's okay, because Hebrews 11 tells us, right? What were they looking forward to? Their reward, right? A heavenly reward. And if you're looking forward to that, that's all the health and wealth you're ever going to need. It's an amazing thing. So this is the encouragement that God gives to Baruch. Even though it may not seem like much encouragement, I hope you realize it actually is, because he's saying, God's saying, I know what I'm doing. I'm giving you even more than you think you can handle, because you can handle it, because I will get you through it. Apply that to the situation that you and I are going in, whatever it is. I don't know. Maybe you've been through it. Maybe one will come in the future. You're having a hard time. Maybe the same response is going to be given to you. Okay, you're having a hard time. Well, I need to give you a harder time so that you can really appreciate me, that I'm going to get you through it. God might be trying to give us that lesson. You know what I mean? We need to be willing to accept that, because this is one of the ways that God will continue to work in your life. And I'm so glad that we've even talked about this in sermons recently. You don't tend to look back at your life and see the things that you wasted a bunch of time on and feel really proud of them, you know, that when you pulled an all-nighter playing video games, I mean, you don't tend to brag about that. You don't usually put that on your resume and stuff. But you climb some mountain that few people have climbed. You build something, or you come up with some new idea that you labor for, you're pretty proud about that, right? But it's a painful experience. Well, same lesson goes for us. God wants to do good things, but sometimes we've got to suffer. And we think it's too hard. It's not as hard as we think. We have it pretty good. So that's finishes up. We covered a whole chapter. You guys ready to go home? No, I'm just kidding. You can't. I'm not letting you. Any questions or thoughts about this chapter then, Baruch?
I can't help but to think, working with Jeremiah. Jeremiah's not allowed to marry, go to weddings, go to funerals. I mean, it doesn't say specifically what it is he's asking, but he's working hand in hand with a man who has to endure so much. I mean, his whole ministry is, I don't know, it just kind of puts it in perspective. It makes me think of our brothers and sisters in China or North Korea right now. You know, some of the things we ask for, and at the same time,
Yeah.
who knows what we're going for.
Yeah.
Which king was it that ripped up what he wrote?
That ripped Jehoiakim, you mean, ripping up Jeremiah's?
Was it Jehoiakim that he's referencing here?
Yeah.
Okay, because I can imagine that after having to write all that twice, that could be part of what's...
Writer's cramp.
Well, his complaining about, look at, I'm not being appreciated here. You know?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, we talk about how long this book is.
Yes,
Yeah,
very
yeah,
good
right.
point. I'm glad you brought that up too. Having that scroll that you worked so hard on just get tore up piece by the stupid king at this time, and then to have to write it all over again. Yeah. A lot of hard things that guy had to go through. It's just a reminder to me, maybe I don't have as much to complain about as I think I do. Man, I would get so mad when, have you ever lost a term paper before? Any of you been there? You forgot to hit save, and you hear these panic stories about people losing their term papers in college and stuff. What a nightmare. And it kind of is, but you know, we can just type it all out again. And now I have autosave now. I never lose anything, you know. And if I lose a few sentences, I'm mad. I'm like, how dare this device goof up? I should not be losing. You know, I'm just so entitled to all this good stuff. And this poor guy had to go through all that. It helps me to realize, man, life is good. Sometimes the better life is for me, the easier it is to complain. I've just noticed that. I don't know why that is, but it's like getting spoiled or something. So here's where we go from here. These next few chapters are oracles to foreign nations. Oracles are the words that God has through his prophets to foreign nations. They are not in chronological order, so that's what this chart is for, to kind of lay out a chronological sequence of events so that we can kind of see where we're headed. So we're getting into chapter 46, so that's going to be this verses 1 through 12 of chapter 46. That's right here. That's the area of Egypt, so we're going to be in the first oracle there. And then we'll get into the Philistines in chapter 47, 48, 49. And then there'll be some other things that we cover at the end, and then we're finished with the book. So that even though we've got a few short chapters here, the closing chapters are pretty long, but at the same time they lay a nice, I don't want to say chronology, but they help kind of lay out a nice sequence of events that happens for us, and so they are beneficial. So this is kind of an idea of where we're going to be, where we're headed next. So chapter 46, let's start there. First verse. That which came is the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet concerning the nations, to Egypt concerning the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, which was by the Euphrates River at Carchemish, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, defeated in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah. Line up the shield and buckler, draw near for battle. Harness the horses and mount the steeds. Take your stand with helmets on, polish the spears, put on the scale armor. Why have I seen it? They are terrified, they are drawing back, and their mighty men are defeated, and have taken refuge in flight, without facing back. Terror is on every side, declares the Lord. Let not the swift man flee, nor the mighty man escape. In the north, beside the river Euphrates, they have stumbled and fallen. So this is the message concerning Egypt, concerning Pharaoh Necho. God's got something to say for you. You guys, you can't go against me. You're going to be punished. Nebuchadnezzar is going to be the one that wins. And he's laying out the picture, right? What it looks like when you get defeated. I was reminded just a few weeks ago when we were talking about it Sunday morning, we were talking about Matthew 24. These prophets oftentimes get lengthy. They have a lot of things to say, and they can get very poetic, especially when they talk about destruction of nations, right? We've read a number of these things where it talks about them coming, watch out, terror on every side. What's that triple threat they always use? Sword, famine, pestilence, or plague, I always thought that'd be a good name for a rock band or whatever, sword, famine, plague. But you know what I mean? They just throw all these different things, and it's as though they try to give you a good picture of what that would be like. Those pictures are helpful because you get into the New Testament, and there are some passages that use the same pictures, and they're deliberately getting you to think back to the Old Testament prophets. Matthew 24 is a good example, and also you get into the book of Acts as well. You have these references to, those days the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, or the stars will fall from the sky. Well, if you're reading the Old Testament prophets, you understand what that means. That's exactly what they would describe when kingdoms fell. When nations were burning up and being destroyed, this is the language. And they don't have the screens and the movies and the stuff that we have today, so they're trying to mentally put yourself there. You're there. Terror on every side, a state of confusion. People are running, you don't know why. It's one of the scariest places to be in. Your own army maybe has abandoned you. In the destruction of Jerusalem, they say a lot of, and in the case of many other battles, one of the ways God won battles for his people was to cause confusion amongst the people who they're fighting against. A lot of times, the reason why they would win, Israel or whoever God wanted to would win, is because God would have friendly people turn on themselves. They were so confused, they didn't even know who they were fighting, and so they would attack each other. So this is kind of the same kind of picture, like it's scary, you don't know what's going to happen. Watch out, what do I do? Get ready. Might as well not get ready. It's hopeless. There's no way you could win against this battle. He's trying to describe what it's going to be like in this poetic language. So when he says shield and buckler there, one of the things I found interesting, maybe this is just me, but This is kind of backwards to what I understand this to be today. Normally when I think of a buckler, I think of kind of that smaller round shield, and then the shield would be more the bigger thing. But my understanding is it's reversed here. That in reality, the buckler was a bigger shield that would cover almost the whole front of a soldier, and the term used for shield was something about half that size. And the reason why we know that is a few references in Kings and Chronicles. It took twice as much gold for Solomon when he made a ceremonial buckler as it did for him to make those shields. So it indicates, interesting. So it's kind of reversed the way we're used to seeing it. Now, Egypt never used much cavalry, but they did use something pulled by horses quite a bit. What was that?
Chariots.
The chariots, yes. Those chariots, they were known for their chariots. And it's my understanding too, I didn't realize this, but a lot of the chariot wheels are the size of a person. Like they are huge, massive wheels. And I guess it makes sense. You don't want to get stuck or anything. You got to keep moving. That would be pretty scary. I mean, okay, I thankfully have not stood in front of an oncoming tank. I hope none of you have. Maybe you have. I would prefer to avoid that. But man, if anything with tires the size of me, wheels the size of me coming towards me, that's a little intimidating for sure, for sure. So Egypt, they were known for using their chariots. Oh, and by the way, you can look into this more, but they found some of those massive chariot wheels in the bottom of a certain sea. Can you guess which sea? The Red Sea. I wonder why that. Go figure, crossing the Red Sea. They found some of that, evidence of that. Yeah, so in verse 5, you see what it says about them. Why have I seen it? They're terrified, they're drawing back, they're mighty men, they're defeated, they have taken refuge in flight. And he just goes on. This is referring to the Egyptian army. What do we know about the Egyptian army? Well, one of the best trained armies alive. A long history of excellent military superiority. There is no reason whatsoever to describe the army of Egypt, Egyptian fighters, like we see here in verse 5, and even in verse 6 there too. There's no reason for it unless they've been utterly defeated. Or I would suggest, not only have they been utterly defeated, but God has stepped in to make sure that things do not go the way they're supposed to go. God has intervened in such a way that these normally well-trained fighters who would not be confused, who would not be put off by these circumstances, are very confused and scared and don't know what to do with themselves. So there's no reason for that unless they were being defeated because God stepped in. And so that's what's going to happen. And he continues in verse 7. Who is this that rises like the Nile, like the rivers whose waters surge about? Egypt rises like the Nile, even like the rivers whose waters surge about. And he has said, I will rise and cover that land. I will surely destroy the city and its inhabitants. Go up, you horses, and drive madly, you chariots, that the mighty men may march forward. Ethiopia and Put, that handle to the shield, and the Lydians that handle and bend the bow. For that day belongs to the Lord of hosts, a day of vengeance, so as to avenge himself on his foes. And the sword will devour and be satiated, and drink its fill of their blood. For there will be a slaughter for the Lord God of hosts in the land of the north by the river Euphrates. Go up to Gilead and obtain balm, O virgin daughter of Egypt. In vain you have multiplied remedies. There is no healing for you. The nations have heard of your shame, and the earth is full of your cry of distress. For one warrior has stumbled over another, and both of them have fallen down together. So you see the idea. Egypt, do everything you possibly can. It's not going to work. You're going to keep on stumbling. There is no way you can win. Use all the stuff you got. Shields, swords, horses, chariots. That balm from Gilead, it was known for medicinal purposes. Can't heal you in this situation. All the remedies that you have, everything that you have used to this point that you rely on is not going to work. And that's kind of what God is emphasizing. Just remember when God says things like this, to Egypt, and he points out all the things that they rely on. And you think, those dumb Egyptians think you can fight against God. You're just, they're relying on their own medicine. All right, yeah, fair enough. They were dumb, they were stupid. But just stop, put the arrows inward, and think about, Seth, all the times when you thought you could just take care of things yourself. You thought, I know how to solve these problems, and it's not, I'm going to go to God in prayer. I'm going to go do this, I'm going to go do that. I've got these things worked out. Oh, I don't worry about this because I've got things taken care of. I've worked on it or whatever. Yeah, but have you given God a thought in this particular moment? Or are you just working things out in spite of God? And is God really God to you? It's the same kind of thing that we are tempted to do today. Rely on ourselves instead of thinking, oh wait, God's God. I need to go to him first before I start stressing out and thinking about all these other things that I've got in my own plans. Same kind of thing that we do today. Now, this is an event being described that will take place at the Battle of Carchemish, 605 BC, the battle that turns the world upside down, where the Babylonians become the new world power, and this precedes them marching down into Jerusalem and taking over that. All the stuff that we had already talked about a few chapters ago is actually future from where we are right now. Right now, we're back, and Jeremiah is not in chronological order. It's organized based on various topics, and this is one. He's talking about the four nations. Egypt is going to fall. History very well attests to the fact that the Egyptians fell. They lost their control, their superpower status in 605 in the Battle of Carchemish, and they were no longer the great world power. They were still a power, but nothing like they once were. And it's my understanding they would really never recover from that. They would be significant and prominent for a long time, but not prominent to dominate the world, not in the way they used to be long before that. So this is one of those things that secular history well attests to. We continue, verse 13. This is the message which the Lord spoke to Jeremiah the prophet about the coming of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to smite the land of Egypt. Declare in Egypt and proclaim in Migdol. Proclaim also in Memphis and Taphanes. Say, take your stand and get yourself ready, for the sword has devoured those around you. Why have your mighty ones become prostrate? They do not stand because the Lord has thrust them down. So, Babylon wins. Later on, Babylon, a number of years later, would finally invade Egypt around 568 BC. Much later on, they would come down there and do that. Verse 15 says there, it says, why have your mighty ones become prostrate? Does any of your versions say that differently, or any of you have a footnote there? Yeah.
One face down.
One face down? All right.
Why would the warriors be laid low?
Laid low? Okay. It's my understanding, well, I looked at this, that term for mighty ones, at least in some of the manuscripts, not in all of them, and some of them it's actually singular, mighty one. And so what they're thinking may be the case here is this is probably a reference. God sometimes is referred to as the mighty one, the holy one, the mighty one, these different names for God. Well, this is probably the Egyptian version of their mighty one, which could be a reference to this ugly looking thing right here, this Egyptian god Apis, or Apis, I don't know how you pronounce it. This is a figurine they have that dates back close to 400 BC. It's in the British Museum. But that could be a reference there too. Instead of just talking about their warriors, it might be saying their god. Let your God stand up. But they don't. They've fallen. Why has he fallen? Well, because he can't do anything. I kind of like that because we know God has a habit, especially in dealing with Egypt, but also with the other nations. God loves to poke fun at the false gods, right? Right? We've seen this before. Remember Dagon, when the fish flapping god, like in the arks there, and I guess we won. We conquered. We stole the Philistines. They stole the ark, and then the priests come in and Dagon, the giant statues, down, bowing before the ark, and pieces are broken. So, okay. And then what do we know about Egypt some 900 years earlier than this? What happened to Egypt concerning their gods?
the plagues kind of took out each god and made them inferior to our God.
Absolutely. The 10 plagues that we're all very familiar with, specifically an attack on separate Egyptian deities. They worship the Nile River. Oh, you worship that Nile River? Okay. It's all going to be blood now. You have a frog god? Yeah, they had a frog god. Okay. See if you can control these frogs. And they go crazy, right? And you go right on down. You worship the sun? Oh, look, I turned the lights out. 3 days. Nothing. You just go right on down. You worship Pharaoh himself? Well, look at Pharaoh's son. He's a god. He's dead. You just go right on down the line. Each one of those plagues was a serious attack against an Egyptian deity. So I tend to think maybe God's doing the same thing. Maybe some of those other manuscripts have it right, that their mighty one, whatever God they're trusting in this time, even if it's new and improved, idol 2.0, just can't stand up against God. So, similar to how God's called the Holy One sometimes, that might be what they're talking about. Verse 16, they have repeatedly stumbled. They have fallen one against another. They have said, get up and let us go back to our own people, to our native land, away from the sword of the oppressor. They cried there, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, is but a big noise. He has let the appointed time pass by. As I live, declares the king, whose name is the Lord of hosts, surely one shall come who looms up like Tabor among the mountains, or like Carmel by the sea. Make your baggage ready for exile, O daughter dwelling in Egypt, for Memphis will become a desolation. It will even be burned down and bereft of inhabitants. So God is mocking their idol and their soldiers in this metaphor. These mountains that he puts out there. This is a picture of Mount Tabor and Mount Carmel. These very big, prominent locations. Let's see, where does that say that there? They loom up like Tabor and like Carmel by the sea. Yeah, that's a pretty big amount of looming there, I would say. That's going to get my attention. Like, okay, that's definitely quite a presence there. Make your baggage ready for exile. So yeah, I think God's mocking that idol that they had, and he's mocking their soldiers in this metaphor. He's saying, hey, you need to get ready. You need to get ready to go into bondage. It will be burned down and bereft. There's a certain phrase here, and I'm missing it. Oh well, maybe I missed it. One of the things I think of is if the preceding verse was accurate, and he's talking about not just their soldiers, but he's talking about that mighty one, that God of theirs. It's as though God has come along and said, okay, you're giant bull, go ahead and get ready. And then God's going to go do some cow tipping instead. He's just going to, not there, because it's just no trouble for him. So whether it be soldiers or whether it be this bull-like creature that they relied on, either one, God's kind of, and God has a way of mocking pagan gods too, as he rightly showed. So he continues, Egypt is a pretty heifer. What a nice thing to say. Egypt is a pretty heifer, but a horsefly is coming from the north. It is coming. Also, her mercenaries in her midst are like fattened calves, for even they, too, have turned back and have fled away together. They did not stand their ground, for the day of their calamity has come upon them, the time of their punishment. Its sound moves along like a serpent, for they move on like an army, and come to her as woodcutters with axes. They have cut down her forest, declares the Lord. Surely it will no more be found, even though they are now more numerous than locusts and are without number. So, verse 20 says something interesting. Pretty cow. God's going to do some cow tipping. Don't worry, he's going to take care of that. But what's he sending? My version says a horsefly. Interesting. Yeah? A biting fly. Yeah. A gadfly, is that what it says? Interesting. Yeah, and my understanding is it is some sort of a biting fly, which seems to be what the word is describing. And you just wonder, because at first thought it's like, that doesn't sound very intimidating, like a, ow, ow, I don't know. I mean, it's annoying for sure. Nobody likes getting bit by stuff, but, so what is this thing? Well, I'm not sure, but you know what it reminds me of a little bit, and it just makes me wonder. Remember when God was dealing with the people of Canaan long ago, and he said to the Israelites, when it was finally time and they were finally ready, you don't need to worry about them. I'm going to drive them out, and I'm going to use something. I'm going to send this ahead of you. You remember what he sent? You know what he called it? The Lord your God will send the hornet. I'll send the hornet ahead of you to sting them, to drive them out so that you guys can take it over. And there's a bit of a debate, like, what does that mean exactly? What is that, Is it a literal creature? That would be pretty freaky. Like, I would run out of town if I saw something the size of a Godzilla over there, a hornet. That's one way to get him out of town. Or this may be just the power of God, this great fear that swept in. Regardless, if it's God, he could use a horsefly and inflict the damage of Godzilla if he wanted to. So I'm not worried about exactly how it happens, but it makes me wonder if this is the same kind of metaphor. What they would recognize is the hornet. That's when God swept in. Whatever that hornet was, it allowed this small tribe of people to overtake all the giants of the land of Canaan and win. And God's got the flies coming for you, Egypt. Well, same thing. It's whatever that was that God took over a mighty nation before, he's going to do it again, regardless of what it would be. When it talks about locusts, pull any one of these pictures from the internet, but a locust plague, pretty nasty, right? You can understand why they were so afraid of it. Even if these things weren't physically stinging you or anything, what's going to happen to your crops? When you got a cloud, and some of the pictures you see, it looks like a dark cloud, but that's all locusts, it's all bugs that eat your crops up and leave you nothing left. That was, you talk about scary in that day and age, because your food supply is it's there, it's all out there, and then this comes and eats it. How can you fight that? There's nothing you can do if one of those came. So you can't fight against God. In verse 22, he said, its sound moves along like a serpent. This is interesting because in the book of Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, in chapter 29, verse 3 of Ezekiel, and then in chapter 32, verse 2, he pictures Egypt like this crocodile, like this raging reptile, a crocodile. But now Jeremiah is like, nah, they're like a serpent slithering away in defeat. Just nothing left. They've been ashamed. They're not nearly as threatening as they once were. And then in verse 23, even though they're like locusts, doesn't matter. God can deal with that. Okay, verse 24. The daughter of Egypt has been put to shame, given over to the power of the people of the north. Who are the people of the north, by the way? What's that a reference to? The Babylonians, yeah. Usually Nebuchadnezzar or the Babylonian army, they're referred to as the people of the north. Not because they dwelt completely north, but the northward direction is the direction they would come in to meet in battle a lot of times too. And they were somewhat north to where Egypt was. Thus, verse 25, the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel says, behold, I am going to punish Ammon of Thebes, and Pharaoh in Egypt, along with her gods and her kings, even Pharaoh and those who trust in him. I shall give them over to the power of those who are seeking their lives, even into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and into the hand of his officers. Afterwards, however, it will be inhabited as in days of old, declares the Lord. So, Ammon, or Ammon, was the sun god of Egypt, very similar to Ra. We're familiar with that name, Ra. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is, and I'm not sure about this, but that they were two separate deities that over time kind of were linked together, and sometimes they're referred to as Ammon-Ra or Ammon-Ra, and are pictured as one. Both sun gods was the idea, and they were Egyptian gods. The largest ancient temple that we have found was built to this sun god, Ammon. some of the pillars of that temple, they say, the base of just the pillar, that little, I don't know what you call it, hearth or step platform thing that goes around the pillar, they say you could fit 125 people on one of those little pillar steps that they have for this temple. So these are some of the pictures to give you an idea of the massive ruins that we have of this. Yet again, the Bible is talking about something that really did happen. Massive temple built, and God's calling them out, saying, hey, you're going to be put to shame. Ezekiel predicted 40 years of desolation for Egypt, and that's in Ezekiel chapter 29, verse 12 and following. So perhaps Jeremiah is echoing what Ezekiel has said there too. Perhaps he's saying the same thing. He sure could be right here. Nevertheless, I just don't get a good vibe for Egypt. I don't know about you guys. I just don't feel very good about them right now. I don't think they're...
You know, though,
Yeah.
the last verse is a good vibe, because
Okay, yeah.
if you think of Babylon or Tyre, he said, I'm going to destroy you and nobody's going to live there ever again. I mean, but
Good point.
afterwards, however, it will be inhabited as in the days of old. So they're going to actually survive and come back together and be Egypt again.
Yeah. You know, I'm so glad you pointed that out too, because yet again, credence to what Scripture says, right? There are some nations that God judged equally, but yet at the same time, somehow God knows when they're going to come back and still be considered an identity and when they're not. And true of Egypt. Still was an identity for a while, even though they were judged. So yet another line of evidence. And you're right, a little ray of hope. Not a big one. Not a Amun-Ra ray of anything. But as for you, O Jacob, my servant, do not fear, nor be dismayed, O Israel. For see, I am going to save you from afar, and your descendants from the land of their captivity. And Jacob will return and be undisturbed and secure, with no one making him tremble. O Jacob, my servant, do not fear, declares the Lord, for I am with you. For I will make a full end of all the nations where I have driven you. Yet I will not make a full end of you, but I will correct you properly, and by no means leave you unpunished. So, God's plan throughout all this was not absolute destruction of the Jews, of Israel at this time, but it was correction, absolute correction. They needed to be dealt with, but the purpose of discipline is not simply to punish. God's showing us it's to punish and correct. It's to make you better. It's to refine you the way you should be. Will there come a day where God will basically say to the Jews, I'm done with you, I'm erasing you? Yeah, 80-70 will be that day where God does ultimately destroy them. But we're not there yet. So God is correcting them and they're suffering, but he's not through with them yet. And so history kind of bears that out here. Okay, back to this chart. Here's a map with some of the ancient regions that he's dealing with. Egypt is way down there, but we're going to get to some of the other ones. In chapter 47, we're dealing with the Philistines, so that's this region right here. A lot of history there between the people of Judah, the kingdom of Israel, and the Philistines. But he's going to call out some of these other nations too. So I'll jump into chapter 47 real quick. But do you guys have any questions before we do that, or any comments from chapter 46? All right, let's cover a little bit of ground. Chapter 47, first 3 verses. That which came as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet concerning the Philistines before Pharaoh conquered Gaza. Thus says the Lord, behold, waters are going to rise from the north and become an overflowing torrent, and overflow the land in all its fullness, the city and those who live in it. And the men will cry out, every inhabitant of the land will wail, because of the noise of the galloping hooves of his stallions, the tumult of his chariots, the rumbling of his wheels. The fathers have not turned back for their children because of the limpness of their hands. So we're jumping back in time before the Battle of Carchemish in 605. God's speaking about that judgment, and the Philistines are going to be judged, right? Before Pharaoh conquered Gaza. We're not sure, but that Pharaoh could be Pharaoh Necho. He could be talking about that being the Pharaoh that came. Gaza was one of the chief cities in Philistia, so that might be what he's talking to. But in verse 2 and verse 3, Babylon's going to come and finish the job. And we already talked about chariot wheels and how such a big thing they were at that time. Verse 4, on account of the day that is coming to destroy all the Philistines, to cut off from Tyre and Sidon every ally that is left, for the Lord is going to destroy the Philistines, the remnant of the coastland of Caphtor. Baldness has come upon Gaza. Ashkelon has been ruined, a remnant of their valley. How long will you gash yourself? Ah, sword of the Lord, how long will you not be quiet? Withdraw into your sheath. Be at rest, stay still. How can it be quiet when the Lord has given it an order against Ashkelon and against the sea coast? There he has assigned it. So we got a lot of things happening here. In verse 4, he talks about Tyre and Sidon. If you look in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 26 and chapter 27, you will read in great detail about Tyre and Sidon and everything that happened there, prophecies that came to fulfillment perfectly. And so Ezekiel says a lot about that in Ezekiel 26 and 27. Tyre and Sidon fell in a big way. Verse 5, it talks about baldness, not that it's a curse necessarily, but why would people shave their heads at a time like this? Typically you're in mourning, you're sad. So shaving your head would be a customary practice of mourning. Also, gashing yourself, that is not a biblical practice. That is not something that God's people were ever supposed to practice. But why would pagans do that? And why did sometimes even God's people participate in things like that?
To get the attention of their God.
Exactly. You want to get the attention of your idol, your deity. Baal, help me, I'm hurting. And you gash yourself to try to manipulate. And that's what the prophets who were not God's prophets, that's what they were all about. Manipulating the gods to serve you. And then we fast forward 3,000 years or somewhere in between. And a lot of modern day prophets are saying the exact same thing about God. That's what prayer is. You give God permission, you manipulate him to bless you in your life. It's just funny how the same type of idolatry, it just hasn't changed. So, verse 6 and verse 7, perhaps it's Jeremiah or the Philistines themselves that are wishing God could stop. Not sure who's saying, please withdraw your sword, put it back in its sheath. But the point is, wait, no, God gave his word. He can't do that. He's going to punish, and it wouldn't be right for him to hold back. So if you want to read more about the threatening oracles against Philistia, there are a number of places in the prophets that talk about it. Amos chapter 1, Isaiah chapter 14, we've got Zephaniah chapter 2 and Ezekiel 25, and also Zechariah chapter 9, verses 5 through 7. And that Zechariah passage adds a cool thing because it says that even after they're destroyed, that they're going to get a ray of hope. They're going to be a part of this messianic kingdom of the church. And that's what happens in the book of Acts, actually, around Acts, towards the latter part of chapter 8 and in verse 9. The gospel is taken up to Philistia, it's taken up to Philistia, and a lot of people become Christians there. It's a direct prophecy of the Old Testament. And so that brings us through chapter 47 and gets us ready for chapter 48 next week. We can talk about some of this stuff. And by the way, yes, yet again, I know you're spoiled, you're used to it, but Ashkelon is a real place, and we found it. You can just count on what the Bible says being true. So that's as far as we're going tonight. Any thoughts about all this? Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting that God gives the same hope to every nation. In other words, Jesus would be the hope for all of them for a future, as opposed to this destruction and judgment that's coming on them. They just didn't understand that.
Yeah.
But cool.
That is really cool, isn't it? That same hope that is held out to God's specific people is also held out to these pagan people as well. And then promises are made to them that are just as beautiful as the ones made to physical Israel or the Judeans at that time, yeah. I find it kind of neat that God does judge other nations and other places that reject him too. But at the same time, it seems as though there's that certain amount of leeway or whatever. It seems as though God's sympathetic. He understands, okay, I didn't give you the exact same specific revelation and detail. I didn't give you the law that I gave to Israel. So it's as though they're getting punished, but the punishment doesn't sound as detailed or as severe. It's pretty severe, but it's as though it's delayed for a while. God seems to be gracious to the people that don't have as much information about him. But how did they get information about him? Well, you go back all the way to Genesis and the promise of Abraham. What does he say? I'm going to make you into a great nation, and those who bless you, I'll bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. So all of that still, Israel was supposed to be an example for the nations around them, and they failed. True, but it does not excuse the nations around them either. God's going to deal with everyone. There is not some special circumstance of, oh, well, I had no idea, and that's that. No, God's given you examples. He's going to be fair. He's going to be right about all this. And so he cares about you even if you're not one of the elite. Even if you're a Baruch, he's just trying to help, just trying to get by. He's going to help you, but maybe it won't be the way you were looking for, not the popular way of help. Anything else?
It's funny how the Jews kept going back to Egypt.
Yeah.
And every time they were in trouble, well, Egypt, you know,
Let's go back to being slaves.
when they came, when Nebuchadnezzar came down, the Egyptians kind of drew them back out of the way. They thought they were saved for a while, but Egypt basically saved them for a couple of months, and then they came back and destroyed them anyway.
Yeah.
But then when they fled there, they went back to Egypt again.
It's that false confidence, I guess, that they can get out of it and be saved with this group of people that can't do it. Yeah. I don't know. It makes you wonder if just the Egyptian reputation was so powerful that they just thought, oh, it's got to work, because they are a powerful nation, but they can't stand against God. So it is funny. Sometimes it causes me to ask the question, what's my Egypt? What's that thing that I find myself running back to that I know I shouldn't, but I don't know why. I'm just comfortable with it, and so I want to run back there and get some security. But as far as God's concerned, it's like a spiritual Egypt for me. I keep going back to it. It's stupid. I shouldn't. Let's pray. God, thank you for again speaking to us and giving us details and pictures and just lots of thoughts about what it's like to be with you, and even more so right now, what it's like to be not with you, to be against you. And what a sad thing to see people who are destined for destruction, before that destruction comes to place, wallowing in confusion and not knowing what to do, not knowing where to turn. And God, I'm so blessed to be with a group of people here that know you, and because of that, we know the purpose of life. We have answers to the ultimate questions, and we know what you want from us. And so we're not really in that state of confusion, but we're living in a world that still is. And so God, help us as we try to do a better job of holding out the answers, the truth that you've put down for everyone, so that the world around us doesn't have to keep living in that awful confusion. And God, please help us to not get sucked into that way of thinking where we start being too subjective, and we start looking at things from a completely wrong perspective, and we forget that this is your world, that you're God, and you're the one that made us, and you know how we should live better than we ever will. So help us to live your way, help us to think your way, and help us to treat others the way you want us to treat them. And it's in Jesus' name I pray.